Hello and welcome to the channel Windows versus Linux. Let me describe two scenarios for you and see if either one of these sound familiar. Scenario 1. You're currently using Windows 7, but you've heard rumors that it's going to lose support in January of 2020, which it will. And you've also heard rumors that Windows 10 is having a lot of issues, which it is, of people losing data, updates breaking their system, and so on. And you're not really sure if you want to switch or if you want to do something else. Scenario 2. You've already made the switch to Windows 10 and you're very unhappy with it. You've either heard the rumors or had actually something happen to your system and you're looking for an alternative to Windows 10. If that's the case, if either one of those sound familiar to you, then I might be here to help. So why does this channel exist? This channel is to help people discover an alternative to Windows 10 who may not want to go to Windows 10. And conversely, it also might help people who are already on Windows 10 maybe become more comfortable with it if they don't want to switch from it. So it is true that Windows 7 will be losing support on January 14th of 2020. Where does that leave you if you don't want to go to Windows 10? Well, you basically have three options. First option is you continue using Windows 7 unsupported and hope that nothing goes wrong. If you plan on using the internet at all, good luck to you. Option 2, you could go to another operating system, which is Mac OS, but I will tell you right now that Mac OS is its own problems. Macs are very expensive to begin with, so you have the cost issue. MacBooks and iMacs usually run anywhere from $900 all the way up to almost $2,000, and God help you if you ever have to have one repaired. They're also very similar to Microsoft in the fact that once you're in their ecosystem, you're pretty much stuck there. It's very hard to break away from the Apple ecosystem. So where does that leave you? Well, that leaves you with scenario 3, which is to find another alternate system, which is Linux. Now, in the old days, Linux was pretty much a dirty word. It was very hard to install. There was a lot of command line work. So unless you were a coder or a developer, you really didn't want anything to do with Linux. But nowadays, Linux has become much more user-friendly. It's much easier to install. It's much easier to operate and run and keep maintained. Now, I should say that Linux itself is not necessarily an operating system. It's actually a kernel. Now, what a kernel is, it's basically a baseline of code or the core of a system that makes an operating system. The thing that makes Linux an operating system is the things you add on top of that, which is basically the user interface that you use, and that determines the way programs run, the way things look, things like that. So essentially what we call a Linux operating system is a distribution, which is a flavor of Linux. So this channel is basically set up to introduce people to Linux that don't want to go to Windows 10 or are looking for an alternative to Windows 10. So why would you want to go to Linux, essentially, is the question. Well, there are several reasons. First and foremost is the cost. Linux is completely free to use. Like I said, there's many different versions of Linux, so you also have the freedom of Linux. You have freedom of choice. For those who may not know, Linux is actually a big part of everyday life. Linux distributions are everywhere and they come in different flavors, meant for different purposes. If you own an Android phone, Android is a distribution of Linux, so you already are using it. If you ever go on a website, most of the web servers online run off Linux. There's high-end corporations, NASA uses Linux, it's all over the place. But we're talking about actually putting Linux on a computer, a laptop, a desktop, so you use it on a daily basis. So, again, this channel is basically meant to guide people into Linux who are looking for an alternative to Windows, who are sick of all the update failures, the potential data loss that comes into play. Because Windows 10, as we all know, is a service now. It's not actually an operating system. And that's another reason you might choose Linux, is because you actually have security and privacy when it comes to the operating system. if you've ever read the terms and conditions of Windows 10, it's kind of ridiculous how much data and how much information of yours that they give away and sell to third-party companies. You don't get that with Linux. When you install a Linux distribution, everything is covered. Your privacy is there, your security is there. You might hear people say that you don't need an antivirus on Linux. And if you combine that with a small dose of common sense, that is true. You do not need an antivirus because the viruses that are made for Windows do not work on Linux. They just can't run. So if that interests you at all, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, we were going to get into Windows versus Linux. You'll probably see a lot of videos comparing Windows 10 to a version of Linux that I'll be showing. And I might also get into covering some distributions later down the line. So stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much.